everyone, and welcome to our seminar series From Single to Mingle in just under 30 seconds, the how-tos in deciphering the dating code. I'm very excited as our televised seminar won the Maltese Award to the Best Produced Show in the educational category. The Maltese Award recognizes producers who constantly bring in creative content in different categories for TV shows. Now, it's like the Academy Awards for producers. Now, my mission is to continue providing great, valuable content to my audience, the viewers at home, and of course, invite the best of the best guest panelists in our show. Now, all this could not have happened without the help of my amazing TV crew at the studio. Now, a big round of applause for them. Now, in our seminars, our guest panelists and myself work very hard in covering all topics related to dating and relationship in the 21st century, and primarily focus on providing you with the tools needed to be successful in your journey to finding the special someone. Now, many of you probably came across my TV show, The HappyNess Journey with Dr. Dan, where I invite guests from all walks of life to share their journey in overcoming difficult challenges in their lives and managing to keep moving forward, despite the odds. Now, so how do you define happiness? Now, we all have a different definition to what happiness means to us, individually speaking. For some, it's a huge mansion by the ocean, while others would prefer excellent health and longevity. Now, most of us also look for that special someone to spend their life with. Now, once you find that person, it takes time and effort and patience to keep the relationship joyful and long-lasting. Now, it can be anything from online dating, sexual intimacy, proper manners when dating, and the list goes on and on. Now, our goal here today is to make sure that your journey is painless and very exciting. Now, I have invited special guests with extensive knowledge in the field of dating and relationship. Now, they're here to share their expertise with us. Now, my name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's seminar. Now, I have a doctorate degree in organizational leadership and communication with a minor in quantum physics. I also am a practicing therapist covering issues such as self-esteem, weight and anger management, and also do marital and relationship counseling. I do individual and group therapy as well. For more information, you can contact me at the number below. Now, it is time to introduce our guest panelists for today's seminar. Now, all experts will have the time to share their expertise and education to our audience and all the 800,000 viewers in Montgomery County residents. Now, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start with Mr. David Banks.
Hi, Dan. It's great to be here. I'm excited for our panel. I work as a professor at the University of Maryland. I've been teaching the human sexuality course there since 1993. I have a doctoral degree in human development, one in divinity. I have master's degrees in social work and public health, and I have bachelor's degrees in economics and nursing.
Well, thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
Lori.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Lori Shapiro, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker holding licenses in Florida, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. I'm also a certified sex therapist, and I work with couples and individuals, marital counseling, individual counseling. I have specialty areas of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered adolescent adults, along with alternate lifestyles, polyamory, kink, BDSM, fetish, and any kind of sexual dysfunctions and disorders.
Cover it all. Thank you.
Hey Dan, thanks for having me back. My name is Dave Elliott. I'm an international relationship coach. I work with clients, couples and individuals all over the world, and I am an author. I've written a book on how to write a really effective dating profile, and I'm also working on my next book right now. It's how to understand previous wounds that are coming back again and again so we can heal them and move to a new place so that they no longer come back and self-sabotage any longer. Great to be back. Thank you.
Good topic to talk today. Mark.
Dan, thanks for having me. I'm a master's in social work. I have a practice in Silver Spring. I specialize in anxiety, including social anxiety, and I use esoteric techniques like bilateral brain stimulation and energy psychology, which allows me to get very rapid and dramatic results, long-lasting results.
Quite new strategies, huh?
Yeah, it's actually not as new as you'd think. There's 100 studies that show, or roughly 100 studies that show that this works. Even the American Psychological Association has had to begrudgingly admit that this weird stuff produces results, and it's been around for like 20 years.
Wow.
And it's based on acupuncture, which is 5,000 years old.
Beautiful. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Well, thank you all for being here today, and we'd like to thank as well as our audience. Now, we're going to start with Dave. I have a couple questions for you, actually. Now, what is the difference between what you would call a relationship that is obtainable versus one that is sustainable?
Well, I think a lot of times it has to come down to, basically having two people who are in alignment in a bunch of different areas so that there's enough that can go long term. Like you can have attraction. Attraction can be a rather short term thing, and sometimes it could be, it's not really built to sustain for the long term. So it's really, like I kind of think of it like, it's kind of like a fire. If you have a fire, it requires like three different things. You have to have the spark of attraction to get it started, and then there has to be the fuel that is the ongoing things that they have in common, and then of course there's air as well. If any one of those things, and air is basically their ongoing appreciation for one another and giving each person room to grow within the dynamic of the two. But take away any one of those things, and it's not really built to sustain. Take away the air, it's going to be finished. It'll die. Right. So you need to have all those three things in a balance, basically, to keep it sustainable for the long term.
Interesting. Mark, would you consider, to what extent do you consider like arguing? Is it healthy, not healthy? How do you position this when two people get involved into like yelling at each other? What do you consider that as in terms of health?
It's actually a complicated question because some people think that anytime you're disagreeing, it's an argument. And I think you need to know more about what's happening. You're not going to ever be in a relationship where there's no disagreement unless you are with a robot who's been programmed to agree. And in fact, if there's no disagreement, then it could be that your partner is too timid to disagree with you, or perhaps you're a bully and they're too timid because you're a bully. I think you need to look at the kinds of arguments you have. Are you having petty arguments, like you left a sock on the floor? Or are you arguing about substantial things like, do we want children? Are we making enough time for each other? And then I think you need to look at, how do you argue? Is your partner respectful when they argue? Are you respectful? Or is your partner, are you dismissive of each other? So it reveals a lot about you and your partner that is useful to look at. So I don't think that the arguing itself is the problem, but it reveals things. I think you need, any relationship that's going to last, you're going to have to resolve things. So how do you do that? And does it end up in screaming, or can you sit down and respectfully figure it out?
Is it more because people don't listen, that the argument increases in strength and decibels?
That could be one of a zillion reasons why you end up with an argument, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't think your partner listens, then you would increase the decibels to get the other person's attention.
Sure.
So that could be one of a million reasons, though, right? I mean, you could be with someone who thinks that they know the right way to do everything, and you have to argue because you have to raise the decibels because there's no other way to get your point across.
Good point. Now, Dave, what fair fighting skills do you need when it comes to, like, if we continue with Mark, discussion?
Sure. As you said, you have to be able to listen and hear what your partner's saying. If you don't understand what they're saying in their position, using a technique called reflecting, sharing with the individual that you heard what they said, paraphrasing it, those are important fair fighting skills so the person feels heard.
But don't the other person might get aggravated because, well, you're being a parakeet by repeating what I just said?
If you paraphrase in your words, not theirs, then the other individual shouldn't be aggravated. They should feel respected and heard and honored that you actually understood what they were sharing.
But what's the outcome to that? I mean, if you continue by just repeating what they just said, how do you continue to make the other person believe that you're actually going to process what they asked?
You have to problem solve. The most important skill a couple can have is the ability to solve a problem, whether it's the sock on the floor or purchasing a new home, in a way that leaves each of the parties feeling honored, loved, and respected. The ability to do that is what separates couples that stay together from those that don't.
Very good point. Now, Lori, what are the questions that you should ask a potential partner when it comes to wanting to go long-term relationship?
I think there's a lot of questions that we're going to ask potential partners for proceeding to a long-term relationship. I think we need to talk about morals, values, thoughts about spirituality, sexual intimacy, whether or not you want to raise children, whether or not you even want to have children. Are you the type of person, do they want to live together prior to marriage? Do they want marriage? And it always comes back to, how do you feel about finances, handling finances? How do you communicate? How do you problem solve? And I think also understanding what that person's love language is, and does that model and match yours? Are our libidos lined up? Early on in dating, people may be feeling very intimate and romantic on a regular basis, but as the relationship starts to move into the next phases, are our libidos compatible? Because oftentimes couples will come in where they're not on the same page. And I think when you're looking at somebody as a long-term partner, your sexual health and sexual history is part of that, a very big part of that.
But how long can they really determine before they know that there's no sexual compatibility, or they're not really in the same wavelength?
Well, I think some of that is being an honest person with yourself, not just with your partner. I have many couples who will come in and they'll say, my wife or my husband or my partner, they used to do this and now they won't do it at all. And many partners will say, well, I was really just doing that because I knew you liked it, and now that we're together, I don't really want to do that anymore. And then the other person feels like they're taken advantage of, or that the other person has presented something that's not real. So I think some of that is through really raw communication of saying, what do you see for yourself? Like, if we're living together, how are you going to feel about this? How are you going to feel about that? And really keeping that communication open. Authenticity comes through. When people are being authentic about what they're thinking and feeling, you're going to get that. It's going to show in eventually.
But I'm not sure if all of you do agree or not, but some people who are very demanding in the beginning of a relationship, that's kind of like shows to the other person that, oh my God, if they're like that in the beginning, how will they dare when they're going to be able to be comfortable with each other? So to what extent should they be very demanding in terms of, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for, should they wait the third, fourth, fifth date, sixth date? When are they supposed to be as honest as you mentioned?
Well, I would say the first 2 to 3 dates are really just about seeing if there's chemistry. I would really want to know if there's chemistry. And if already you're getting sometimes red flags, women will say, oh, I went out with him and I thought he was really nice, but he said this and it made me a little uncomfortable. And I was like, well, right then and there, I'm like, why didn't you say, no, this isn't for me? And men will say it as well. Well, I thought, they were a nice person and maybe that would be different. So I think you need to be watching body language, listening to what people are telling you. Are they being authentic? Are they following through? I'll call you on Tuesday. Did they call you on Tuesday? Those sorts of things. So the things that are important to you, you don't have to lay out a laundry list of this is what I want in a partner. But I think before you go out on dates, you should be looking for partners who are already presenting some of the things you're interested in.
Interesting. Now, Dave, you talk about a model called Always Formula. How did you come up with it? And if you could just tell us a little bit more about it.
Sure. So I was invited on to Fox Television to speak when a certain celebrity filed for divorce after 72 days of her marriage, and they wanted me to come on and talk about that and provide some context for them. And I didn't know them, hadn't talked to them, so I didn't really feel comfortable speaking about something that I had no personal knowledge of. So I thought it was a great opportunity to turn it into a teachable moment. So what I did is I kind of created a formula, something that they could look at. So I called it Always, and I talked about, and you mentioned most of them too, the things that you want to have in common. If you want it to last always, it's you want to have your aspirations and dreams kind of in alignment. You want to make sure you want the same things in life. What does your life look like? What kind of things do you want to do? You want to make sure that your links to your family are solid. Like, some people are really, really close to family, other people have no use for it, and it's really about us. So it's going to be different. You want to make sure those types of things are in alignment. And then there's like personal lifestyle issues, like a vegan and someone who doesn't really take care of themselves, a junk food junkie, probably are going to have some challenges with diet and gym habits and things like that, and just activity levels. And then the W is about wealth and finance. You know, you want to, they can have a spender with a saver, because that's always going to create a conflict. And then there's the A is about always faithful. So you want people who are kind of, you know, again, you know, they want to be just the two of them, and not, you know, into swinging or something like that that you were talking about. And then the Y is about youth and children, and then the S is about
Sexuality.
it's not it's actually about spirituality. Thank you.
Spirituality.
Spirituality.
Close
So
enough.
it's like, again, what you want things to look like for your future. You know, if one person's really devout and religious and wants to honor that, and then the other person isn't. Again, these are some key areas where you want to talk about that stuff, you know, early on going in. And, you know, we were talking about the idea of relationship is about partnership. Partnership is about negotiation. And negotiation, the key word is always going to be about enough. Are both parties able to get to a win-win, so that both people are feeling like they have enough? So if you're saying is, you know, at what level do you get really demanding? I think if someone's getting really, really demanding, I think at some point you have to get to a place where, you know, it's win-win or no deal. And so this isn't probably going to work, but you wish one another well, and you kind of move on your separate ways.
Is the acronym always in that book?
It is not in that book.
Okay, is it on the next one?
Oh, actually, yes. You know what?
Okay,
I think it
there you
is.
go.
As a matter
Yeah,
of
so
fact,
you know where they can buy it, right? It's
Yes,
on Barnes and Noble and Amazon.
It's on Amazon,
Okay.
definitely, and they're catchyourmatchbook.com,
Perfect.
catchyourmatchformulabook.com.
Now, if we talk about like energy signature, okay, so we all are like a transmission tower that people are attracted or repulsed. Now, energy signature changes. So as we grow in a relationship, people either they go the same path or they kind of separate. Now, how do we at this point overcome this disparity that we create as we grow as individuals, when one person is still doing the same thing and the other person want to grow spiritually? So if S at the end of always is spiritual, don't you think that this should be at the first letter the most important? Because if they do not have that kind of connection, it will never going to end up a successful relationship.
Well, you know, I think in a partnership, I think one of the funniest things is, you know, people who are going to marry someone and they're going to expect them not to change. And the reality is, people are going to change. Change is the one constant in life. So, you know, again, it's about having enough values in common so that you can appreciate and understand one another's growth. But then, as you say, at some point, you know, if someone wants to, you know, spirituality, if someone says, you know, they want to go and, you know, climb to the top of a mountain and sit with a monk or something, that might be a bit of a deal breaker for other people. So you have to kind of make that decision when you get to it. You can't necessarily predict that's going to happen 10 years later. So, but I think if you give people room to grow, and again, you're essentially in alignment with, you know, appreciation and respect for their journey, but yet also a clear understanding of like, yeah, that doesn't work for me. So, you know, at some point you do hit a bit of a deal breaker status, and I think that's where people have to get really clear with what are their values and beliefs and ideals.
Beautiful. Thank you. Mark, when you should reveal what you're looking for in a relationship or in life? Like, for example, when should you tell your date you want 5 children or 4 or 10? I mean, depending on how they can produce.
Well, I think you want to be authentic from the get-go. I mean, there's no sense in going out with somebody who doesn't want kids and you want 5 kids. I mean, what's the point of even having coffee? So, you know, now you don't need to reveal every little dark secret on the first date. That might be a bit much. But if you want marriage, don't waste your time with people who are just looking for one-night stands. So you want to be upfront, I think. You want to be authentic as to what you're looking for. But you need to have, as Lori said, you need to establish some
Honesty,
chemistry.
yes.
So you can't sit down and then say, okay, here's the list of what I want. Let me see your list. That's not chemistry.
That's very demanding.
Yeah. But on the other hand, if it should be in your conversation what you're looking for in your life, and if you're going out on dates and you don't go there at all, then what is it? It's a waste of time, and you don't need to. You know, dating is we don't have unlimited lifespans. You want to find someone as quickly as possible, I think. So you don't want to waste your time with someone who doesn't want what you want.
Now, when should someone change themselves to be able to adapt to the other person? I mean, either you're selfless or selfish. So when do they have to kind of like start realizing that, you know what, it's my fault, it's not theirs?
Sure. Laurie mentioned the Gary Chapman's love languages. He also wrote a book about languages of apologies. And so if you look at the selfless and selfish continuum, you have to figure out where you are on that continuum, dialogue with your partner and find out what do they need in terms of their ability to get over these arguments or hurdles, and how you really want to change. Ultimately, in your heart of hearts, you've got to know if you're genuinely ready to make a change. And if you are, then you can apologize for previous behaviors, make the change, and move on. If you're not truly 100% in your heart ready to change, it's not going to last. You can make it for that person, but it will eventually revert back to the other behaviors.
Does anyone here in the audience ever had to change themselves for the other person just to be able to make the relationship work? Anyone? Try?
Yeah.
Please ask a question to the experts. No one's gonna no camera's gonna be on you, there's not a problem. Or you could sit from there because we have to have the audio actually.
My first marriage, I made a major mistake of marrying a woman that it was obvious to me that I should have never married her, but I'd made it up in my mind that this is the woman that I was going to marry. I married her. Well, it turned out to be a wreck, but the signs were always there, but I refused to see them. So I blamed myself a majority of it. So I don't know where we're going here.
Well then, if we take this example, to what, if he start blaming himself, is he gonna take this kind of attitude with future relationship and always him being the culprit versus the victim? How do we?
I think that when we're looking at past relationships or the ending of a relationship, it's important to allow yourself to grieve that loss, because that's a sad thing, because we go in being hopeful and wanting things to be positive, but I think that taking the onus for ignoring the signs, I don't know that you should put that much value on it. Use it as a learning opportunity, as part of your journey, and saying, I may have in the past seen these things and known that they weren't good for me and ignored them, but moving forward, I know now that I wouldn't tolerate that again. But I learned a lot from it, so now I can take those lessons and move forward.
I want to thank you for the question too, and I think you give us a great example of like a masculine energy. Masculine tends to be very focused on an outcome, and you said you met her and you kind of saw these things, but you also said, no, I'm set on this.
I can make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the area where it sounds like you've learned a valuable lesson.
Oh, yes.
And
An
so-
expensive lesson as well.
I believe everything happens for a reason. It's not, because you're bad, you made a mistake. I think it's because you probably, from that experience, you learned to honor yourself better. And while being focused on what you want, also listening to what's important to you. So I think you learned that lesson, and I thank you very much for asking the question. That's great.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Anyone else that want to share? No? No one changed for anyone? Everyone is selfish here? Yeah, okay. Mark, is lasting change even possible? I mean, what is the best strategy to adapt for yourself when it comes to deciding that, you know what, I'm gonna be a bit selfish and just gonna go on my way and just do things that are gonna make me happy versus the other person?
Well, you asked, is lasting change possible? And I hope so, because the point of my career is to deliver lasting change. I'm not so arrogant as to believe that I have cornered the market on the methods of lasting change. And the longer I stay in this career, the more I find new ways to provide lasting change. And some of them, you just wouldn't expect the different ways that people can create change. I mean, you can go on a men's weekend and,
In Vegas.
well, I'm thinking about like the Mankind Project. I did the Mankind Project, and you're wrestling with other men on the floor, and you come out a different person at the end of the weekend. I mean, weird stuff. I do energy psychology. There's hypnosis. There's all kinds of, talking to your inner parts. There's a million ways to create change. I think if I think you want to find a therapist or a coach who's insightful and understands the area that you need to change. And you need to resonate with their technique of change. And you should be looking for someone who's got some chops in delivering results. So it's possible to sit with a therapist for 20 years and love the person and feel supported, and yet you're still have the same patterns that drove you into therapy. So you're looking for someone who has a model for delivering change to you, and it makes sense to you, and then you see results fairly quickly.
And can that happen through meditation or through the techniques that you were talking about that you are actually doing on a regular basis?
Every week I'm helping people change, and it's sometimes it's incredibly dramatic and sometimes it's incremental, but it's concrete, it's noticeable. They come back and they say, last week I was scared on my date and I couldn't concentrate, and this week I went out with this guy and I was relaxed, and at the end of it I went, oh my God, I didn't even think about what I'm saying, and is he judging me? So I hear those kind of before-after changes all the time.
Interesting. Now, David, is a cheater always a cheater?
There are a continuum of cheaters. There are the drop-dead cheaters who are going to cheat no matter who they're with, no matter what the circumstances, they're going to cheat. That's who they are. They were born to cheat. There's the I did it once in my life and I'll never do it again cheater. The goal is to determine, if you've been cheated on, which one of these or what in between are you dealing with.
And how do you know? Because
You ask questions, you are engaged in an ongoing assessment process. The drop-dead cheater will cheat again, probably the next month. The once-in-a-lifetime cheater is going to be very accountable, very apologetic. They're going to let you know where they are. They're not going to be looking at other partners potentially walking down the street. There will be a variety of behaviors and things that they say and do that indicate that they are this once-in-a-lifetime cheater. But that ongoing assessment is something that has to go on in the couple. Ongoing communication, transparency, all of that will let you know if you've got the drop-dead cheater or if you've got the once-in-a-lifetime cheater or somebody in between.
If I was going to say,
I'm just wondering if you think the person who's been cheated on needs to evaluate themselves and see if they brought anything to the
Usually
table.
not.
To bring that, yes.
Usually not.
I would say, though, also, in addition to when you're trying to determine the drop-dead cheater versus the once-in-a-lifetime cheater, the drop-dead cheater, things are going to continue to unfold. They're going to have given you a little bit, they got caught, they're going to give you just what they think you need to know, but then you do ever so slight digging, there's more and more and more. Whereas the once-in-a-lifetime, they'll give you everything. This is where I was, this is what we did, here's their phone number if you want to talk to them, we can have a meeting, here's my credit cards.
transparency.
But the person who's habitual, they're going to keep more and more is going to come out. Oh, you were at an Airbnb, right? You're in an Airbnb on Tuesday when you were supposed to be at a meeting here, and more and
wrong
more,
answer.
right? More and more and more comes out.
Interesting. Lori, is it okay to ask a potential partner about mental health and substance abuse of themselves and their family? I mean, it's
Absolutely. I think that is so important that when you're going on initial dates and let's say you've gone on a couple dates and this looks like a potential long-term partner, you're like, oh, I really like this person. Absolutely. Have you had issues in the past? Have you been in therapy? Do you take medication? What's your family history like? I absolutely, during my years of dating, asked those very questions. And it's like STDs. Another question you need to be asking people. I don't want to go on 5 or 6 dates with somebody who, say, has been unstable for years and years and years, or who has a schizophrenic brother that they're caring for. These are things I need to know. I need to really know that before I invest, because maybe I won't care. Maybe I'm like, okay, so you've got a grandmother with dementia who lives with your parents. That may not be relevant to us in our relationship. But the fact that you've been, in sobriety for 15 years, that could be very relevant to me if I have the desire to have children, and the genetic implications and lifestyle implications. If I like to drink wine and I'm with somebody who's in recovery who doesn't drink at all, that would be like dating someone who doesn't eat cheese.
But then again, it goes to how people perceive their addiction, because some of them are in denial. For them, a keg of beer is just drinking socially,
Right.
versus one person will say, no, just one beer a meal, it's
Right.
already overdoing it. So they have the tendency to say, oh no, it's nothing, it's just like very social, or I smoke socially, but yeah, they're a chain smoker.
Right.
Again, you said that you want to know that.
Right.
They will not give you the truth. They'll just say, oh no, it's or like.
But you
know,
watch those patterns. If somebody says to you, listen, I'm a social drinker, but every time you go out, let's say there's a bottle of wine and they've drank the majority of that bottle, that's a red flag that I would be attending to. Or somebody who would say to me, oh, I only smoke cigarettes when I drink, that would be a complete deal breaker.
Okay.
No smoking is acceptable smoking. So you have to know what it is that you're comfortable with and watch for the red flags.
David, what would you say is the root cause of a breakup, and how is it avoidable?
I would say the root cause, again, would be just in the partnership not being able to have two people get on the same page, and one or both partners is not getting enough. So it's about their values and what they're looking to achieve in a given area. So, it's always going to be about sort of this dance between what do you need, what do you want, and what gets in the way. And, at some point you have to say, this is probably not going to last long term. Again, it depends on, there's a lot of variables. Are you married, or how many dates are you on here? That's a very different categorization there.
But you could have two people who share similar values, want the same thing, but one or both of them have toxic means of communication. So they grew up in a family where there was mean things said just casually, and that became normal to them, and dismissive, insulting, that kind of thing. And so that's another deal breaker in a relationship, is just they're unable to be kind to each other. So they may ultimately want the same thing. We want to be married, we want to have children, we want to live on on the sea, but they may not know how to be nice.
And I think that goes back to what we were talking about previously, is that change piece. And for us as mental health professionals, we're the conduits for that change, and seeing whether or not people have true commitment to change, what they're willing to do to change themselves for the relationship. And I always say that the relationship, the marriage, that comes first. That's the client, is the relationship of the marriage. And if the people want to work on that marriage, they need to say, this is what I'm willing to bring to the table to make that relationship work.
And if you're someone you're the offender, you're mean, there may be a good reason behind your meanness. You may have grown up watching mean people, and that's your model. And, in therapy, you can figure out what is the cause of this dysfunctional pattern, and you can rapidly change it so that you're no longer mean. Someone might be mean as soon as they think someone's challenging them, right? And so that's dysfunctional, but you can change that. You might become mean just when you become anxious. And you might be anxious because you grew up in a dysfunctional house with chaos and drug abuse or something. But again, you can get rid of the anxiety, and you can get rid of the pattern of being mean and show up in a different way. It's absolutely possible, but you do have to find someone who has got the chops to do it.
But when you have like childhood issues, such as like when you see your dad beating your mom, and you bring this to other relationships, I mean, how do you break that pattern, or how do you break that process when it comes to like helping them say, you know what, it's not because your dad did it that you have to do it as well? What will trigger them to be able to want to be violent or abusive?
Well, in your example too, you were talking about some childhood issues. So a lot of times we replicate that which we've seen, that which has been normalized. I think there's not in your example is more extreme. I think in your example of someone, speaking less than kind, being mean. I think there is a value for the person who's attracted that experience as the receiver as well. I think the value is putting out there, hold on, the way you spoke to me, that's not going to work for me. And I think the value is that you start to know your value when you can speak it, and you have put up a boundary. And then after you put up a boundary, you enforce that boundary too. So I think there's value. I think a lot of times people think, oh my God, there must be something wrong with me because this person is disrespectful. And no, I don't think that's true. I think a lot of times we attract those things, and then we can sort of either shift them or we move away from them and say, no, that's absolutely not okay. And in your example, the more extreme of someone who is abusive, my personal belief is that's a deal breaker. Nobody is physically violent. And there are just situations where you're just not going to participate in that. That's not going to happen. And it's something that has to be off the table entirely. And that person can either use that opportunity to say, wow, I really need to take a look at this, and then maybe do some work, get some help with someone who's qualified to help them with that, or again, they'll move their separate ways. And for the person who is the abuser, like if that happens enough time, at some point there's enough leverage where it becomes enough pain once you lose something that's valuable to you, someone who you really care about. If it happens, if it stacks, eventually you may hit a threshold where you're going to power through that and say, look, I can't do this anymore. It's cost me too much. So I think there's value for both people. Sometimes you got to get to leverage, so you're like, hey, I can't do this anymore. It's kind of like the idea of like if someone who doesn't take care of themselves and then gets cancer, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I have to totally take care of myself now and look at it better. So everything comes to serve, but you just have to get the message. You have to be aware of it.
The message is drastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting when you're talking about, from my perspective, you talk about what you learn in childhood and what you learn from your family, and that also goes with sex and sexuality as well. So when you have people going into relationships and where it breaks down with relationship to intimacy and sex and all of those other things, and you ask the couple, what did you learn in your family home? What are the attitudes about sex? Did your mother and father, were they affectionate? Did they touch each other? What were their attitudes about, masturbation, sex before marriage, living together? So it's an interesting piece of really getting a good psychosexual history to be able to help the couple with those attitudes as well, both in the beginning of the relationship or when they do, if they do run into trouble.
One of the things that we want to address is the narcissist, the mean person. These are adults, and your childhood is an excuse up until about age 8, when the brain is concrete operationally developed and you can figure out that this is wrong. You've got to take responsibility for it, and we need to hold people responsible and accountable for it. We can't continue to allow people who are abusive to use their childhood as an excuse to continue to be abusive. They know it's wrong. They need to stop. There are issues of power and control in relationships that they are running on. They're operating to gain power over someone that they want to subordinate, they want to control, and there's a lack of trust in these relationships. So one of the things we have to do is we have to develop a sense of trust in these relationships so that the need to exercise power and control another human being, another adult, isn't there. And then people are less likely to be abusive.
We have a question here from the audience.
Yes, I just wanted to elaborate on that about abusive individuals. If it's inveterate, if it's deep-rooted and happened early in childhood, I realize that, yes, at a certain point, people should take responsibility, but sometimes it's hard. And what makes something like abuse even trickier is that, if the person that's being abused is trying to get out of that situation, and they can't for whatever reasons, that's one thing. Some people that do get out of it tend to go back, I think statistically. So abuse is really more challenging than saying, okay, well, you have a dialogue. It's, in my experience, it's been very difficult to, I'm going to use the word escape.
I think abuse is a continuum, right? And you have abuse on one end where somebody is violent, and of course, I wouldn't want to stand for that for a second. But abuse could just be yelling, and you don't want to ditch someone just because they yell. But
the goal of abuse, though, is again to exercise control over another person and to abuse that power. It may take the form of yelling, intimidation, throwing things, using the children against them, taking money. There's all kinds of forms of abuse. The women in the shelter at the Duluth, Minnesota developed a topology that I'm sure we're all familiar with about the different forms of abuse. It is difficult for survivors, people who are the targets of these abusers, to escape, but our job as therapists is to help them get the resources, emotional, financial, spiritual, that they need to get out of these abusive relationships and to hold the abusers accountable.
But it said that mental abuse is much more damaging.
Devastating. I've talked to women in shelters, and some of them have even told me, I wish he would just hit me and get it over with,
That's what I heard,
rather
yeah.
than calling me the C word or the B word.
But I don't think I agree that every time someone yells, the goal is to exert power over another person. You could have somebody who has developed the habit of yelling to protect themselves, and then maybe they had to do that to get their clingy parent to back off, and so when they perceive,
So they were trying to control their parents' behavior, and they're still using
but it's-
yelling as a control technique.
Yeah, but it's kind of different than the abuser who's just a jerk and has to have everything their way. So, I mean, every behavior we are engaged in has some desired effect, and I don't think we want to lump in real abusers who beat people up or just uniformly terrible and nasty with someone who just loses his temper once in a while.
I do. I want to lump them together.
You want to lump them together.
It's a control technique. The person who loses their temper and learns that behavior in childhood and didn't let it go after the age of 8, 12, 18 is a control abuser.
I think that all relationships have different levels of power dynamics, all of them. And I think even as clinicians, we get very uncomfortable with the word control because the word control sounds so pejorative. But I think that all relationships have different power dynamics at different times, and some of them are a lot more harmful than others, but they all seek the same kind of idea. And I think it's just sometimes we get a little switchy around the word control.
But if it's seen from a third eye perspective, Lori, it depends exactly how deep the control is, as David said.
I agree.
When you are a part of the relationship, you don't see it the same way as if I see it. So for me, I would say, boy, this person is really controlling. But this person in the relationship will say, no, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
So again, it depends on who sees it, who perceives it. That's the big problem.
I agree.
You have a question here.
Yes, I have a question about disclosure and red flags at the beginning stage of dating someone. So I've been dating someone for about 2 months now, and only because I asked a question, it was told to me that within, I guess, the second week, the individual had hooked up with his friends with benefits. So my question is, early in a relationship or just dating someone, are people supposed to disclose that, or because there's no commitment, there's no need to?
Well, I think that's that communication piece when you're talking about disclosure. What are your expectations? And for me, if I'm not having sex with somebody and we're just dating and getting to know each other, I'm not sure how important and relevant that is. It's an individual. Some people may say, well, if we're starting to like each other and you're seeing anybody other than me, then you're not focused on me. Where other people may be like, you do you. We're just going on a couple of dates, and whether or not there's any intimacy involved. I think that when intimacy begins, which includes everything up to and including intercourse, I'm talking about any physical intimacy where you're exchanging bodily fluids, just for the nature of protection, your own safety, I think it's important to have that disclosure, because you can get cold sores, there's herpes, I could go on all day, the litany of things like mononucleosis, even something benign as the flu. So I feel like if there is something going on that's of a physical nature, that's the discussion you have about what should we be disclosing, not just for emotional reasons, but for the reasons of personal safety.
But did you verbalize it with him that you're it's exclusive, or you're just kind of going out and dating and not really saying anything? Because men are kind of stupid to a certain extent. Unless you verbalize it, unless you say, even writing it down, they will not really get it,
Yeah. Some people say don't say anything, and then if you say something, then But with that disclosure from just asking,
But what do you feel?
Thankfully.
Don't listen to other people. What do you feel about what would you do?
I have been honest from day one. I feel as if the individual was not honest. They
Well,
made
then that's
themselves
that
out
red
to be
flag
something.
right there. If they're not honest from 2 months of dating and they're being somewhat evasive or
Yes.
or not feeling, or that for me would be a red flag right there. I'm always of the mind, I would rather have you tell me something. It may hurt for a minute, but I'm a grown woman, so ouch, and then I'm okay. I don't, any level of dishonesty or lack of integrity for me is not
It's like pulling a
acceptable.
Band-Aid. It hurts, but then after that, you're done.
Exactly, exactly. I definitely
But you
think.
guys did not have an understanding about your relationship at this point. Is that right?
No, it's only been 2 months. So I only asked about, let's say, 2 weeks ago.
So what is the frequency of dating? Is it once a month?
No, once a week, maybe 2-3 times a week.
So that's 8 dates.
Okay.
Yeah, about that.
I think it should be at this point pretty straightforward
Yeah.
when it comes to disclosing where you stand with them.
Okay.
I think the benefit of this is this question is not for us. This question is for you, and I think you have a really good idea about how you feel about this already. When you say he's not honest, I'm maybe a little bit confused. He offered this up to you,
I asked.
but he told you. He could have
And
said,
he
"Oh no."
said it. He said, yeah.
So that is a level of honesty, and there's something here that there is a deal breaker for you. So what I want you to understand is there's an expectation of what you thought dating him was going to equal, and there are the results. And the expectation and the results, they are not matching right now. And this question is not for us. This question is for you. So he was honest about, yeah, I did this, but he maybe didn't. He didn't know not to tell you that because he has a different expectation. And so that's where you want to
That's
sort
where
of
it
figure
is.
out. I'd like for you to be clear and know that, yeah, I think you're not really clear yet that it's okay that this is a deal breaker. And
I'm asking because I felt confused because, yes, he was honest in
Yeah.
his response. But then he could have just said something before. So I don't like feeling confused. And that was my whole... For him, he didn't want to hurt my feelings, he said. He didn't.
Well, it sounds like there needs to be a conversation at the very least here about what your new expectation is, so that you guys can get on the same page or decide that you're not in even the same book.
Yeah.
Well, I think the page supposed to be turned at this point, and he's supposed to be out of the picture. I mean, if you're okay with this, then this is really up to you. But if he did what he did, and as Dave said, that if he was honest with you, then at least you could kind of give him that part that he was truthful. But if you went and had sex with someone else, then at this point it's you to decide who you want to do.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Here we go.
Oh, I've been reading a lot about gaslighting recently, and I was wondering, in instances where it's not really abuse, it's just rather meanness, do you advise sticking with it or just abandoning ship?
Narcissists and other people who gaslighting is using craziness to make the other person think that they're crazy.
They're doubting themselves.
Right, and doubting themselves. Somebody who's gaslighting is only going to ramp up. It's a hook. They bring you in, and it will get worse. It never goes
better.
away. Never.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the
I-
directive.
It makes you feel guilty all the
The,
time.
the end result of gaslighting is about getting you literally doubting your own senses. Like, no, I didn't say that or I didn't do that. And again, the end result is the weakening of your own observational skills, or what you think, what you see, what you sense, what you feel. And basically it's weakening and weakening and weakening. And as he said, it's not going to get better. So it's not just garden variety meanness. There's usually an end result, and it's probably not going to be in your favor.
And kudos to you for being able to label it as gaslighting.
Yes.
Because true gaslighters are so manipulative that you don't know it until you're 6 months down the road.
And they often
So again,
escalate
kudos
just
to
like
you.
in the cycle of domestic violence.
Yes.
There's that they're really nice, and then it starts to build up, and then you get to that gaslighting piece, and then it explodes, and then they show the minimal remorse and regret. And
Isn't
the
that a
whole,
part of the 4 horsemen's?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yep.
That's exactly
Yep.
it.
And I think we'll agree this is abusive.
Yeah, oh yeah.
That is
Definitely.
control as well. So for the last question we're going to ask Lori is, when you're talking about sexual intimacy, when do you reveal your sexual history?
And that's a very interesting question, and it's a very good question, because different people feel differently about it. We're when you're talking about roles today in society, there's still a lot of the antiquated roles where for a man, having been priorly maybe a little bit promiscuous, that's an okay thing. But for a woman, being promiscuous could really be a deal breaker for some men. So I would say having the conversation with your partner of what are your morals and values around sexual promiscuity, experimentation, have you experimented with same-sex partners, what kinds of things you've done is going to be based on understanding what their morals and values are. And if you're talking to somebody and a guy says, oh, I'm going to marry a virgin, or if my girlfriend has had more than one man in her life, she's not for me, then maybe that's not the right person for you. So I would watch and check their attitudes, see what they're bringing and representing that they see, think, and feel about it, and then share your history. And history doesn't have to be every single solitary detail, or young people call it body count. I mean, you don't have to reveal your body count, but ideas about what your life experiences have been, I think, is really important. And I think in a good, close, intimate relationship, it doesn't matter in the long run, that you could be able to talk about it. Oh, I was in love with this person during college and we had this whirlwind romance. And your partner will enjoy in learning your history, just like they'll be happy about hearing about the pony you got one year for your birthday.
So make it more of an interesting story, not kind of like, oh yeah, I did her, I did her, I did her.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Good. Anyone else about sexual intimacy, about how soon you should reveal it?
I was going to say the spin I'd put on it too is that a lot of times you ask the question like, what does it take to get to make it okay or something, and I think that's the wrong focus.
Should be an easy flow in the conversation.
I think part of dating, and thank you for that question that you asked about gaslighting. I think the gift in this conversation, the gift in any kind of challenge that comes up is you got to go back inside and say, who am I? Do I like who I am? Am I comfortable with who I am? What's too many? What's too few? What's experienced? What's not enough? What am I willing to tolerate? Like, I think all these things happen for a beautiful reason. They come to serve us. Even if we think about the abusive situations or anything like that, it doesn't seem like, oh, well, that was a good thing, because it didn't feel good at the time, certainly. But I think the key of positive mental health is understanding that everything does in fact come to serve, and there's a gift and a lesson in everything. And if you get the gift and the lesson, you never have to get it again. I always tell my clients, it's like, there's a reason why you're not going to be at third grade on Monday. And the reason you're not in third grade is because you accomplished everything that the state or the federal government says that you needed to achieve in third grade. And that's why you're not going to show up for that class again. So again, if you take it like that, like, I got the lesson, I never have to put up with someone who's going to gaslight me again, or someone who's going to be abusive, or someone who's going to lie, or someone who's like, thank you, I'm good, I got it. Lesson learned. And I think that's the real gift of dating. It's not to make them say it's okay. No, you be okay. I think that's the way that it has to go.
As long as you go with how you feel. It's not what everyone else recommends or everyone tells you. It's how you feel inside and how you should go and...
Except it's a little more complicated than that, because how you feel might be based on things like your childhood. So if you couldn't trust your parents, you're going to be wired to not trust. And so when you're sitting with someone and you feel distrustful, it might be because they're not trustable, but it could be because you're wired to distrust or to feel anxious or to feel unloved. And so you have to kind of look at your patterns of feeling and thinking and behavior and think, is this something is this something about me that I'm seeing these things in these people?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, I think we have to conclude. Well, folks, that's all the time we have for today. And I would like to thank our guest panelists for attending today's seminar. Their contact information will be provided on the lower third of your TV screen, as well as the end credits at the end of the show. I would like to also thank our audience for being here today. And I know that you could be out. I mean, I think it's 60 degrees outside, so being indoors, I think I really appreciate you being here today. Anyway, I would like to also thank you all for the time that you have shared your expertise with all the audience and as well as the viewers. Now, here are a few concluding words of wisdom. Now, what is kindness? When we wish and seek to help others, our attitude is more positive and relationships become easier. Now, we're less afraid and have less anxiety. Otherwise, we remain shy and hesitant and feel the need to take 1,000 precautions before we decide or we approach people. Now, when our intentions are good, we have greater self-confidence and are stronger. This is how we learn to understand how precious and valuable kindness really is. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you have yourself a wonderful day.